Good morning, everyone. I am Kristen Wilson with the Office of Federal Procurement Policy within the Office of Management and Budget. We are, so in my role over there, I am leading the HIDEF initiative from the policy side. And then with me today, I have our amazing GSA team. So GSA is the managing agency for the HIDEF initiative, which means HIDEF, when built, will reside at GSA. They've been tremendous partners for us, and we're really excited to continue collaborating with them as we start working with all of you on getting these baseline assessments in. So with that, let's talk about what we're covering in today's training. So I'm going to start it off by giving us a little context about if you are coming to us and you've just received this template and you're like, why am I doing this and what is it for? That's what I'm going to cover. Then we'll get into the instructions on how to fill out the template. And then finally, the resources that will be available to you after this training. Next slide, please. Okay, so context. What is the baseline assessment? Why are we doing this? So my favorite question to ask in large group settings is, who is familiar? Raise your little Zoom hand if you're familiar with Circular A137. If this is like most groups, probably not so many are familiar with it. That's cool. It's okay. It doesn't hurt. Oh, we got one. All right. So yes, we got two. This is great. So over the summer, OFPP released our first circular in 20 years called the Strategic Management of Acquisition Data and Information, Circular A137. Back of the envelope, point of what we are trying to do through this circular is to start pulling together all of the disparate acquisition data that's being collected around the federal enterprise into one centralized environment where our agency users, and there's a whole variety of them, from data scientists, data analysts, all the way through to our acquisition community, will be able to make use of this data to make better procurement decisions. But of course, this is an absolutely enormous undertaking for a variety of reasons, and I'm sure you're all thinking of what those are. So before we can even start compelling the agencies to share data we really need to pulse check all of them to see where they are in their data journeys. How are they collecting data? What data are they collecting? And then what data they need. So that is the baseline assessment template. This is kind of going to be our foundation for all of our actions moving forward. I will note that we'll do the baseline assessment one time, but then every year afterwards, we will have an annual strategic plan. That's going to change every year depending on the priorities of both the administration and the agencies. But we'll only do this one baseline assessment. So we've released it as of November the 14th, and we are giving the agencies until February the 14th to return that back to us. And we're going to kind of walk through major areas the baseline assessment. And I believe we cover them on the next slide, but can we just next slide, please? Okay, well, so I'll walk through the three key areas and then I'll walk through what we're doing with this data. So area one is really going to be like a chief data officer function or whoever is managing the data domains within your agency. So we want to hear how you are managing your acquisition data. Why are we asking about this? Oh, thank you. Because I'm sorry, I'm bouncing around, but we're just flowing. So we're asking about this because we want to hear how the agencies are managing their data internally first. And if there is a high degree of commonality, we want to be able to align to that in the HIDEF environment future state. So that's a chief data officer function, as well as, anyone else within your agency that would have awareness of those data domains. Next, we have kind of some CIO, Chief Information Officer, IT type questions. So what are your acquisition data source systems? We want to really deep dive into that. And again, this is tightly scoped for acquisition data only. This is not a data call of every system in your agency, just acquisition data systems. And we also want to hear about whether your agency is collecting CLIN data. How are you collecting CLIN data? Where are you collecting CLIN data? We know from the technology landscape assessment that there is a massive range of if and how this data is being collected. So we really want to like deep dive into that a little further, because we know that getting arms around CLIN data is very, very important out in the field. And then finally, we're going to pulse the acquisition community on use cases and prioritizing those use cases. What I say more than anything else about high def is we're not just building it to build it, we're building it to use it. We're building it for our federal SMEs to make use of this data. And so we may think something is really important, and you all could tell us it's not important at all, and you have much more urgent needs around these types of use cases. So that use cases and prioritization tab is going to be your opportunity to weigh in on that at the executive level. And then finally, we have a high def partnership tab. We are going to ask the agencies to name their high def accountable official if they haven't already. This is required under Circular A137. And also, if there are pilots in your agency, opportunities for us to partner with you. We are not trying to recreate the wheel. So if there's things that you're doing really, really well with acquisition data that we could potentially scale as we build out the high def environment, we want to hear from you and learn about that. Next slide, please. I'll pause there. Are there any questions so far? I know I kind of went through that quickly, but I feel like we got to the most important part. So I'll leave it. That leaves us a lot more time for instructions. But any questions on why we're doing this and kind of the context? I appreciate the thumbs up, Katie. Thank you. Awesome. Okay. Before I hand it over to Brian and the GSA team, I will note that you can always reach out to me directly if you have questions about the policy, the direction, what we are doing. You should all have my email. If you don't, I will share it out after this. Please feel free. And you can always email the high def team at highdef@gsa.gov, and they will get your email to the right place as well. So with that, I will hand it over to Brian for instructions. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Perfect. Thank you, Kristen. Can you hear me all right? Perfect.
Yep.
Well, my name is...
I'm sorry, Brian. We did just get a question, and will you be discussing the role of the SAO? And so I think that's a Kristen one. So I thought it'd be a good point to pitch back.
Yeah, I'm glad. Who asked that question?
Thomas Cochran.
Thomas. Well, thank you for asking. Yeah, so the high def SAO, we're really leaving that for the agencies to identify the right, where I'm not being overly prescriptive in what that person needs to do. The goal for that role is for that person to be the lead for their agency and to have reach into all of those different functions. So you don't have to sit in the CIO shop, the CDO shop, the CAO shop, but you do need to be able to talk to those functions and get the answers that we need. And as you'll see as we go through the template, these are all kind of interwoven parts of the acquisition data journey. And so wherever that function best, or wherever that accountable person best sits, is completely fine for me, as long as they have reach into all of those different functions and that we can make sure that we can get the information that we need out of your agency. So I hope that makes sense. Once we move past baseline, the goal is to start doing high def quarterly meetings with our accountable officials. We don't have a comprehensive list yet at this time, but making sure that we keep you guys informed on progress, how we're going with the build of the environment itself, the use cases as they're prioritized, kind of pulling together a leadership council for high def that will then feed into the high def executive steering committee as we move along. So I hope that answered your question.
He did have a follow-up. What level are you recommending for the senior accountable official?
You mean like SES or 15? I don't know what he meant, but I'm assuming that's kind of what you meant. I think it's helpful if it's someone at the SES level, because they do have, they are SES. However, every agency is different with how they kind of build out their leadership functions. So I'm not going to be overly prescriptive about that.
All right, he's got it
And
now.
I will note, this is not set in stone, right? So if an agency selects someone as their high def accountable official and then they need to pivot or change it as this initiative moves on, very similar to category management, we completely understand and we can be flexible with that. And Alan, I see your hand raised.
Hi, Kristen. Hi, Eric. And hi, Brian. We are like at Treasury, we've had some issues with the category management placement of the SAO because, frankly, our chief acquisition officer is a little bit detached from day-to-day contracting. So, you know, the SPE is really the one who pulls the strings. And at Treasury, we have a Deputy Assistant Secretary for Acquisition as our SPE. So, you know, for us, that's the proper level. So we've been having that back and forth with OMB, and I think that's where the question comes from. Like for this effort, right, what's the most effective level going to be? You know, we obviously, you know, you and I offline, Kristen, talked about what Treasury's approach is going to be. And, you know, we think that's going to work for us. But I mean, the reason I bring this up is kind of to represent the group here and say that, you know, I think the question comes from the fact that OMB's been pretty prescriptive about the category management placement. And in our case, it didn't really help us. Like we had a way forward and we've been performing pretty well. So, you know, I offer that to you all.
Totally. And we're very excited that we get to continue working with you in this high def effort, you know, you representing Treasury, Alan. And, you know, I think the person who will be most effective in this role, the level is less relevant to me as is their reach into these different functions. So for example, some of our agency partners have already designated folks who have a deep background, not only in contracting, but in acquisition systems, right? Because they really understand kind of that interconnectivity between the two. If I had my druthers, those would be the types of folks that would end up kind of being part of this as agency accountable officials. Alan, you're one of them. Some of our other members from the PCE, for example, are being designated as the high def officials because they have that systems data and kind of use case understanding and for sure have the reach into the field.
Yep, good.
All right, great. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that question. Brian, over to you.
Perfect. So my name is Brian Schmidt, and I support the High Def Initiative effort, working directly with Kristen and the GSA team. For the next part of the training, we're going to discuss how to fill out and submit the baseline assessment template specifically. So just going through all of the key information that you need to have a successful baseline assessment. This will include things like navigating the Excel template, some specific tab by tab instructions that will go into some key definitions, etc., uploading attachments, and then finally submitting your response. But before I jump into that, want to just quick bounce back to slide 7. So Naomi, if you could navigate us there quickly. So here, want to just flag some key scoping aspects of what we're about to talk about, because a lot of these terms can be quite broad. And as Kristen mentioned, we've tried to scope this as narrowly as possible. And so what this assessment applies to is going to be post-award acquisition data, which is the initial focus of the High Def Initiative overall. And we define acquisition data further in the glossary, which we'll get to in this presentation, as well as in the baseline assessment template as you're going through it, and in Circular A137 that Kristen mentioned. Critically, this assessment is not going to apply to FPDS data or any information that's already been shared with FPDS. We're just interested in new data that isn't already fully shared and available. It does not apply to acquisition strategy or planning information. Again, we're only focused on post-award data. And classified data or other contracts are not going to be involved in this whatsoever. We're FSMA moderate, and so classified data won't be ingested in any way. So as we talk about different data specifics moving forward, just want to keep those key scoping aspects in mind. Perfect. Then with that, we can go to slide 10. So I'll start with navigating the Excel template. First and foremost, we've color-coded all sections of the template, which again will be an Excel template with 6 tabs to help guide you through each of those tabs. which you can see at the bottom of this slide here. We have that cell color legend. Moving to the top part of the slide, we have a representation of what the top of each of those tabs in the template is going to look like. And one important thing I want to call out that is not shown here is that between the section header and the submission area will be a few paragraphs with key instructions that are going to be specific to every single tab. So it may look like a fair amount of information at the top, but we promise we're not repeating ourselves. It is very specific to each tab. So just make sure that you read that upfront context, because it will very much help with scoping your response, because there may be some things that we're not interested in that we mention in those instructions that, again, could end up saving you a lot of time as you provide your answers. Then below this upfront context, you'll find some gray boxes that contain questions, as well as yellow fields for your responses. And a few key points here are, one, the instructions provided in each question will again help a lot, especially with some of the more open-ended questions. Two, there might be some hyperlinks in these gray cells that will take you to useful resources. Depending on your agency's permissions, you can either just click these hyperlinks or copy and paste the full link, which we'll provide in the template as well, because I know sometimes agency functionality doesn't allow for that. And then finally, all questions need to be responded to unless they're marked as optional. And for long answer questions, you can include as much text as Excel allows. And the more context you can give us, the better. But some of the questions, again, are scoped fairly narrowly. So it shouldn't be too difficult to answer. Then with that down, in the next few slides, we want to talk about some of the unique aspects of each of those tabs. So those key definitions, key instructions for your responses. So with that, I think we can move to the next slide, which is specific to tab 1, data domains. But before I jump into all of that, I'll note in this walkthrough that I won't go through all of the key details in these tab-specific slides or the key details in the template itself, but I do just want to make sure you know what to expect on each tab, why we're asking for that specific information, which Kristen already touched on a little bit, and key instructions about how to develop your responses. And if you have any questions on that, again, feel free to ask once we get to the Q&A. And also we'll flag that my colleague, Eric Rogenstra, might jump in with some additional subject matter expertise as needed as we go through these. So Eric, feel free to just jump in if needed. With that, back to tab 1, data domains. So at core in this tab, we want you to describe your agency's policies and procedures for categorizing and managing acquisition data. And knowing this information is going to help the HiDef team develop data sharing agreements and MOUs that align to your current agency policies. And it's also going to allow us to design HiDef data models and specifically governance structures in line with your current practices wherever possible, which will just really help eliminate unnecessary churn, work, change management by making sure that what we create aligns with what you already have from a policy and governance perspective. Now, to fill out this template, you'll respond to just 3 long answer questions, and you'll also be asked to attach your agency's data strategy if it's available. This strategy document might be more specific than the scope of just post-award acquisition data, but it will help us greatly with general context in this area. Whereas the rest of the questions are going to be very specific. That data strategy document, if you have it and can share it with us, will again just be very helpful for our overall context. I'll also note that we're using fairly specific definitions for data domains and data strategy in this tab, which kind of help guide our questions. So the context and definitions at the top are going to be especially important to making sure you're scoping your responses correctly. And again, those will be at the top of the tab and in this deck. Then to the last point, you'll see on this slide, and for the slides in each tab, we have a list of key terms that are defined in the template. And you can find the definitions for these terms either, again, right at the top of the template or in the glossary at the end of this deck, which I'll show in a bit. Perfect. With that, we can go to tab 2. So acquisition data source systems. In this tab, you're going to list and explain all of the source systems your agency uses to house and manage acquisition data. And by understanding what exact systems agencies are using and how diverse those systems are, the HiDef team can find and develop connection points to make data sharing easier in the future, which again will work with what you already have in place, which is a kind of a big guiding light for us. And I'll note, we want to know about the landscape of these potential connection points, because as we mature as a program, it will help us expand the kinds of data that we collect. But by no means will we be connecting to all these different systems. Again, it's just key context to help us develop functionality later on. And while we're specifically interested in acquisition data source systems, you may also have an aggregated data reporting system that takes in data from many other sources already. And we're especially interested in these kinds of systems because they'll make it much easier for us to connect to your data in just one place. So for instance, if you have a system like DoD's PBIS, this tab is the place to elaborate on it because it could help us quite a bit in the future. Then to fill out this tab, you'll begin by responding to just 5 long answer questions and then describing the overall landscape and level of diversity across your agency's acquisition data source systems. Then at the end of this tab, we have a table where you'll note specific details about each of these systems listed out. With that, we can move to tab 3, CLIN and comparable pricing data. So in this tab, you're going to explain your agency's practices for tracking and managing contract pricing data at and below the contract line item level or CLIN level. And we want to understand the details of available CLIN data because we think that this CLIN data is initially our best option for getting comparable pricing data across agencies. And what I mean by that is a way to compare what each agency is going to be paying for a specific individual product or service. And this is important because it's going to support a host of use cases that give agencies the power to better negotiate with vendors for each thing that they buy, since you'll have a better sense of what the true median is across the government, which could save billions if done correctly. However, we know that CLIN data doesn't always actually get down to the individual item or service level. So there'll be more questions on this tab that just probe how we can eventually get there using this data, because the use cases we could support will be so potentially valuable. We want to learn about this as much as possible. This tab you'll fill out by responding to 6 long answer questions about your agency's contract, pricing, CLIN data. You'll also be asked to share any relevant documentation that you might have that can help us better understand the elements that make up your agency's CLINs. So for example, the key data fields that you use. With that, we can go to tab 4, which is use cases and prioritization, which is probably the most fun of our baseline assessment tabs. And in this tab, what we're going to do is list out a series of initial use cases that the HiDef team is pursuing. And we want your input on how we should prioritize those use cases for development. And so specifically, we're going to ask you to rate each use case based on how valuable it would be to your specific agency and your agency's specific mission. And the more detailed that you can be in the notes next to these rankings, the better we can make sure HiDef functionality provides as much value to you all as possible. Because again, we're doing this entire effort very iteratively with a ton of feedback coming in from agencies specifically. We want to make sure the functionality that we produce and can support is what you need. So this is the place to provide that information to make sure that the HiDef initiative works as well for you as possible. Then at the end of this tab, you'll respond to 3 long answer questions, just adding some additional context to your rankings and specifically requesting any other use cases that aren't already listed in the ranking table. So as you go through the assessment, see the types of data that we're interested in, use cases that we don't know might come to you. We want to hear about them because we're very interested in understanding them better and working with you to actualize them. Then finally, tab 5, very quick. In this final tab, you're just going to add contact information for your HiDef official, which Kristen talked about earlier, and then list any other HiDef POCs at your agency. In this tab, you'll also note any specific topics or areas where you'd like us to follow up with you, or places that you want to work with us to better drive the initiative forward. Specifically, like if you noted a use case in the previous tab, this could be a great place to note that you want to or willing to meet with us to discuss it more. And again, the HiDef team is going to use the results from this tab to just develop a list of key contacts and agencies that we can follow up with and work with in the future. Now, I think we can go through the rest of the deck pretty quickly because that kind of rounds out all the different tabs. I want to very quickly just talk about attachments. So as you fill out a response, again, a couple of tabs are going to ask you to provide attachments, specifically your data strategy and those like CLIN information documents. You'll submit the entire template via email. Some of your attachments might be too big to make it on that single email submission. So we've designed this form that you can use to submit your attachments instead, all in one place. We link to this form throughout the document. Any question that asks you for an attachment, we'll link to it as well. And again, you can use this to get those attachments into us. One small quirk of this form is you might have to break large attachments up to submit them. And if you can't do this, just reach out to us and we can figure out a solution.
Brian, you may not have seen, we have a question. And so if you can see it, I won't read it aloud.
From Thomas?
From Katie Cooney.
From Katie Cooney. Is there a chart defining what somewhat valuable means or just best judgment? Definitely best judgment. Again, we're trying to align to your agencies as much as possible. And so all of this is going to be dependent on just personally or from the perspective of the HIDEF official and your agency, how you would define value. And that's kind of just what we want to understand, is aligning to your preferences as much as possible. Then I also saw a question from Thomas. What is an example of any other HIDEF POCs at your agency for tab 5? For this is a place that if your HIDEF official wants someone else to be CC'd along with them to just make sure that communications are going through correctly, just another level of like communication accountability, you can put that POC in. So not needed, but simply if there's someone that you want to be tracking all of this alongside your HIDEF accountable official, we can support that through that field. Perfect. Then with that, I think we can jump to submission. So once you've completed the template, we have 5 steps here that you can follow just to ensure a successful submission. One being to just review all the sections, make sure that the ones not marked optional are filled out. Then again, email the completed template to the HIDEF team at hidef@gsa.gov. Make sure you submit all of your attachments through that attachment form that I mentioned on the previous slide. Then we will acknowledge receipt of the template via email. So just wait for us to respond to you there, just to let you know that everything's good to go. And then finally, if any follow-up discussions are necessary, we'll reach out to your HIDEF official via email to coordinate. And then at the bottom, perhaps the most important part of this is we've set the deadline for February 14th, 2025 for submissions. With that, we can quickly move on to the last section of our presentation before the Q&A, which is resources. So if you want to go to the next slide, first and foremost, our resource being the training sessions, which we're in right now. We're going to have 4 of those sessions total. This is the first. Each session will have 30-minute presentation at the beginning, plus a 30-minute Q&A. You're welcome to go to multiple sessions. You're welcome to just go to the Q&A at the end. Additionally here, as you can see at the bottom, please stay up to date with any of the latest training and guidance information via our website. So we have a page on Acquisition Gateway for the HIDEF baseline assessments. Any new information will be posted there. And all of the links to any resources you need, links to register, links to the template, to the assessment form, to this training deck are all posted on that website also. So that can be kind of like your one-stop shop for finding information on the baseline assessments. Perfect. With that, we can move to the glossary, which I mentioned previously. Again, a lot of the key terms used in the acquisition space might not be used uniformly between agencies. So we've listed out these definitions to just support you there. We've compiled all the key terms that we've noted throughout the template. These are also, all of these definitions are in the template already, but we thought that putting them in one place might help just overall. I'll note a few key things. If you want to go back to glossary slide 1. So here you'll see the definitions for things like the data strategy, data governance, data domains, which again will very much help scope that tab 1 response about those domains. Again, those definitions are important to that scoping. If you go to the next slide, Naomi, here we have definitions that will support your understanding of CLIN, here we have definitions that will support the different types of systems that we're interested in. So we define all those different acquisition systems that we're interested in you listing, given some of the key ones here. And then on the final slide, we list important things, definitions regarding CLIN data, comparable pricing data, what we mean by that. Moving on from the glossary, just some quick next steps. So 1, again, please submit the templates by February 14th. 2, again, stay informed by following that homepage that I mentioned. And finally, for any questions or comments, feel free to email us at highdef@gsa.gov. We very, very much appreciate the time that you are putting in to do this. So we want to make the process as easy for you as possible. And so if you need anything, if there's something you want to talk through with us, any definitions that are confusing, please reach out to us and we are happy to help. But again, truly thank you for your time in filling this out.